At 72 years old, I made a decision that shocked everyone. I signed the divorce papers and gave everything to my husband, Daniel. My lawyer looked at me like I had lost my mind. He begged me to stop. But I just smiled and signed anyway, because what no one knew was this: I had already won. For 45 years, Daniel and I built a life together. We came from simple beginnings, starting out in Austin before eventually settling in Lake Nona, one of the most beautiful and wealthy areas in Orlando. That's where we bought our dream home. At 72 years old, I made a decision that shocked everyone around me. I signed the divorce papers and gave everything to my husband, Daniel. Even now, it sounds unbelievable when I say it out loud. My hands were steady, my face calm, but inside, I could feel the weight of 45 years pressing against my chest. The room was quiet, almost too quiet, as if even the air was waiting for me to change my mind. My lawyer sat across from me, his expression filled with concern. He kept repeating the same words over and over again, hoping something would break through my silence. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You can fight this. You deserve more." I could hear the urgency in his voice, the disbelief, the frustration. To him, it looked like I was giving up everything without a reason. But I didn't respond the way he expected. I simply smiled. It wasn't a weak smile. It wasn't forced. It was calm, almost peaceful, like someone who had already made peace with the outcome. That smile confused him even more. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if trying one last time to save me from what he believed was a terrible mistake. "Think about your future," he said. "Think about everything you've built." I had thought about it for years. That's why I picked up the pen. For a brief moment, I looked down at the papers in front of me. Pages filled with words that were meant to divide a lifetime into numbers and assets. A house, money, ownership. Everything reduced to lines of legal language. It almost felt unreal that something so meaningful could be written away so easily. My fingers tightened slightly around the pen. Memories flashed through my mind. Moments I had lived, sacrifices I had made, the years I had given without question. Anyone else in my position might have broken down right there. Anyone else might have argued, demanded justice, or refused to sign. But I didn't, because this moment wasn't what it seemed. To everyone in that room, I looked like a woman who had lost everything, a woman who was too tired to fight, a woman who had accepted defeat. They couldn't have been more wrong. Slowly, without hesitation, I signed my name on the first page, then the second, then the last. Each signature felt deliberate, controlled, almost symbolic. My lawyer leaned back in his chair, defeated, watching me as if he had just witnessed something irreversible. And maybe he had, but not in the way he thought. I placed the pen down gently and slid the papers across the table. My expression didn't change. My heartbeat stayed steady. There was no fear left in me, no doubt, no regret, because deep down, I knew something that no one else in that room knew. I had already won. My lawyer couldn't understand it. He kept looking at me, searching my face for some sign of hesitation, some crack in my calm expression that would explain why I wasn't reacting the way anyone else would. But there was nothing for him to find. I sat there quietly, my hands resting in my lap, my posture steady, as if I had already accepted everything that was happening. He leaned forward again, softer this time, almost pleading. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "This isn't like you. You've spent your whole life building this. You can't just walk away." His voice carried a mix of confusion and concern, like he was trying to save me from something I didn't even realize. But I did realize. Every word he said, every warning he gave, I had already thought about it long before this moment. This wasn't a sudden decision. It wasn't driven by emotion or weakness. It was something much deeper, something carefully held inside me for years. I looked at him and gave a small, quiet smile. That smile didn't match the situation at all. It wasn't the kind of smile someone gives when they are losing everything. It wasn't broken or desperate. It was calm, almost knowing. And that's what made it so unsettling. He paused, clearly confused by it. "You're smiling?" he said, shaking his head slightly. "I don't understand." "You're about to give away your home, your savings, your future." I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I let the silence settle between us. Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. And in that silence, I could feel the weight of everything I had been carrying for years. Every moment I stayed quiet, every time I chose peace over confrontation, every sacrifice that no one ever noticed. To him, this was the end. To me, it was something else entirely. I turned my gaze toward the window for a brief second, watching the soft light filter into the room. It reminded me of how many times in life things look one way on the surface, but hold a completely different truth underneath. That's the thing about quiet people. Others often mistake silence for weakness. They never realize it can also be strength. My lawyer sighed and leaned back, clearly frustrated now. "At least tell me you're sure," he said. "Once you sign this, there's no going back." I nodded slowly. "I'm sure," I said, my voice steady and calm. But what I didn't say, what I didn't need to say, was the reason behind that certainty. Because the truth was, I wasn't walking into loss. I was walking into control. Every document I had ever signed, every detail I had quietly paid attention to over the years, every moment I chose not to argue, it had all led to this. I had learned things, noticed things, and most importantly, I had prepared silently, patiently, without anyone realizing. And now everything was exactly where it needed to be. My smile returned, just as soft, just as calm as before. To everyone else, it looked like I was letting go. But in reality, I was holding onto something far more powerful than they could see. Daniel and I had spent 45 years building a life together. It didn't start with luxury or comfort. It started with struggle, with long days and even longer nights, with dreams that felt too big for the little we had at the time. We met when we were young, full of hope and energy, believing that love alone was enough to carry us through anything life would throw at us. In the early days, everything was simple. We didn't have much money, but we had each other. We rented a small place in Austin where the walls were thin and the furniture didn't match, but it felt like home because we built it together. I still remember how we used to sit on the floor sometimes, sharing meals and laughing about the future, promising each other that one day things would be different. And slowly they were. Daniel worked hard, and so did I. While he focused on growing the business, I handled everything behind the scenes. I supported him in ways no one ever really saw. managing the home, organizing finances, making sure every small detail was taken care of so he could focus on the bigger picture. We were a team, or at least that's what I believed. There were difficult times, of course. Moments when money was tight, when stress built up, when it felt like everything might fall apart. But we pushed through it all. We encouraged each other, stood side by side, and kept moving forward. Every challenge we faced only seemed to make us stronger. As the years passed, our hard work started to pay off. The business grew, opportunities came, and life began to feel more stable. We moved from that small apartment to a better home, then an even better one. Each step felt like proof that our sacrifices were worth it. But more than the success, it was the memories that made those years meaningful. Birthdays celebrated in simple ways, quiet dinners after long days, road trips where we talked for hours about everything and nothing at all. There was a time when just being together felt enough, when his presence brought comfort and mine brought him peace. I trusted him completely. I believed in him, not just as a husband, but as a partner in life. I never questioned the decisions we made because I thought we were making them together. Every document, every agreement, every step forward, I assumed we were building something that belonged to both of us. Looking back, I realized how deeply I believed in that idea. 45 years is not a small part of a life. It's a lifetime of shared moments, of building something from nothing, of giving your time, your energy, your love to another person. It becomes a part of who you are. And for the longest time, I thought what we had was unbreakable. I thought everything we built together would always remain ours. As the years went by, our hard work finally turned into the kind of life we once only dreamed about. We moved to Lake Nona, a place that felt like something out of a magazine, clean streets, beautiful homes, and a quiet sense of luxury that surrounded everything. It was known as one of the most modern and wealthy areas in Orlando, and when we first arrived, I remember thinking, we really made it. Our home there wasn't just a house. It was a symbol of everything we had worked for, a $1,000,000 dream built on years of sacrifice, patience, and belief in each other. Every corner of that house held a memory, from the large windows that filled the rooms with sunlight to the quiet spaces where I would sit in the morning with my coffee. Everything felt peaceful, earned, and deeply personal. I took pride in that home. I decorated it slowly, carefully choosing every detail. The furniture, the colors, the small touches that made it warm and welcoming. It was more than just design. It was my way of putting love into the place we called ours. Guests would often compliment how beautiful it was, but what they didn't see was the story behind it. The years of effort that turned a dream into reality. Daniel seemed proud too. He would often talk about the house with a sense of achievement, telling others how far we had come. And I would stand there beside him, smiling, feeling like we were sharing that success together. Life in Lake Nona felt calm and complete. The neighborhood was peaceful, the environment safe, and everything we needed was close by. We had reached a point where things finally felt stable, where we could slow down a little and enjoy the life we had spent decades building. There were evenings when we would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about the past, about how different everything used to be. Those moments felt real, honest, like we had truly earned the right to rest after years of pushing forward. I believed that this was the reward for everything we had been through, that this home, this life, was something that would always belong to both of us. I never questioned it. I never thought I had to, because when you spend that many years building something with someone, you don't imagine a future where it could all be taken away. You don't think about ownership or control or what's written on paper. You think about trust, about partnership, about everything being shared. That house, to me, wasn't just worth $1 million. It was worth a lifetime of memories, and I truly believed it was ours. Life in Orlando wasn't just comfortable. It was full of moments that felt almost magical. After all those years of struggle and hard work, we finally had the time to enjoy what we had built. And we made the most of it in ways that, back then, felt simple but meaningful. One of our favorite places was Walt Disney World Resort. It might sound strange for people our age, but every time we went there, it felt like we were stepping into a different world. A world where worries disappeared, even if just for a few hours. We would walk slowly through the parks, watching families laugh, children running around with excitement, and for a moment, we felt young again. Sometimes we didn't even go on rides. We just sat together, enjoying the atmosphere, sharing quiet smiles like we had done years ago when life was much simpler. Then there was Universal Orlando Resort. Daniel loved that place. He enjoyed the energy, the thrill, the sense of adventure. I still remember the first time we walked through the Harry Potter area. It felt unreal, like we had stepped inside a story. He looked genuinely happy there, and seeing that made me happy too. Those were the moments I held on to, the ones that made everything feel worth it. We also spent time at SeaWorld Orlando, where things felt calmer. Watching the marine shows, the movement of the water, the quiet beauty of it all, it gave us a different kind of peace. We would sit side by side, not saying much, just watching, letting the moment speak for itself. One of the most unforgettable experiences we shared was visiting Kennedy Space Center. Standing there, looking at the rockets, hearing the stories of space missions, it reminded us of how far human dreams can go. In a strange way, it reflected our own journey, starting from nothing, reaching for something bigger, and somehow getting there. And then there were the evenings at Icy Park. Those were my favorite. We would ride the Orlando Eye slowly, rising above the city, watching the lights spread out beneath us. From up there, everything looked calm, peaceful, almost perfect. The world felt distant, like all the stress and worries were left far below. In those moments, I believed we were happy. Not just comfortable, not just successful, but truly happy. We laughed, we talked, we shared silence in a way that only people who have spent years together can understand. There was a quiet connection, a sense that we didn't need to say much to feel close. Looking back now, those memories feel almost unreal, like a beautiful picture frozen in time, because at that moment I truly believed nothing could break what we had built. And I never imagined that behind those smiles something else was already beginning to fall apart. For a long time, everything looked perfect from the outside. Our life in Lake Nona felt calm, stable, almost untouched by problems. The house was beautiful, the routine was peaceful, and to anyone watching, We were a couple who had made it through life together successfully. Eve and I believed that for a while. I held on to that image, that feeling, as if it were something permanent. But slowly, things began to change. At first, it was so subtle that I almost ignored it. Small differences in the way Daniel spoke, the way he looked at me, or rather, the way he didn't. Conversations became shorter. His attention drifted more often. There were moments when I would be talking, and he would seem somewhere else entirely, lost in his own thoughts. I told myself it was just stress, maybe work, maybe age. After all, people change over time. I didn't want to overthink it, but deep down, something didn't feel right. The warmth we once shared started to fade, replaced by a quiet distance that I couldn't explain. The laughter became less frequent. The comfortable silence we once enjoyed turned into something heavier, something that felt empty instead of peaceful. It was like living in the same house, but not really sharing the same life anymore. I began to notice patterns. He started coming home later than usual, sometimes with vague explanations that didn't quite add up. He would keep his phone close to him, always face down, always within reach. There were times when it would ring or buzz, and he would step away to answer it, lowering his voice as if he didn't want me to hear. Each of these things, on their own, might not have meant much, but together they created a feeling I couldn't ignore. Still, I stayed quiet. After 45 years, you don't immediately jump to conclusions. You give the other person the benefit of the doubt. You tell yourself that there must be a reasonable explanation, that the person you trusted for so long wouldn't suddenly become someone else. I held onto that belief longer than I probably should have. There were nights when I would sit alone in our living room, the same space that once felt so full of life, now filled with silence. I would look around at everything we had built, the home, the memories, the years, and try to understand how something so strong could start to feel so fragile. It wasn't one big moment that changed everything. It was a slow shift, a quiet unraveling that happened piece by piece, day by day, until the life I thought I knew no longer felt the same. And the hardest part was this: I could feel it happening, but I didn't yet know why. The moment I discovered the truth didn't come with loud drama or a clear warning. It happened quietly, almost like everything else had been unfolding. One small detail led to another, and before I even realized it, the pieces started to connect in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. That day felt ordinary at first. The house in Lake Nona was calm, just like any other day. Daniel had stepped out, saying he had something to take care of, and I stayed back, moving through my usual routine. But there was a strange feeling in the air, something I couldn't explain, like a quiet tension sitting just beneath the surface. I remember noticing his phone on the table. That alone wasn't unusual. But what caught my attention was the way it lit up with a message. I wasn't someone who checked his phone. After 45 years, trust wasn't something I thought twice about. But something about that moment, something inside me shifted. I told myself to ignore it. I almost did. But then another message came, and then another. My heart began to beat a little faster, not because I wanted to find something, but because I was afraid of what I might. Slowly, almost hesitantly, I picked up the phone. For a second, I just held it in my hand, staring at the screen. It felt like crossing a line I had never crossed before. But deep down, I already knew that whatever was on that screen was going to change everything. And it did. The messages weren't unclear. There was no confusion, no misunderstanding. The words, the tone, the familiarity, it all pointed to one truth I didn't want to accept. Daniel was cheating on me. In that moment, everything inside me went still. There was no immediate reaction, no tears, no anger, just silence. A kind of silence so deep it felt like time had paused around me. My mind tried to process what I was seeing, but my heart already understood it. 45 years. 45 years of trust, of loyalty, of believing in someone completely. And in a single moment, it all felt like it had been replaced by something I didn't recognize. I put the phone back exactly where it was, as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I sat down slowly, trying to steady myself. My thoughts were racing, but outwardly I remained calm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was something deeper. I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I couldn't react the way most people would. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about understanding what had been happening right in front of me without me seeing it. The late nights, the distance, the silence, the small changes I had tried to ignore, all of it suddenly made sense. And the truth was heavier than anything I had ever felt. But even in that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't break. Because something inside me was already beginning to shift. Something stronger than pain. Something that would not let me fall. When Daniel finally came home that day, everything felt different, even though nothing had visibly changed. The house in Lake Nona looked the same, the furniture untouched, the quiet evening light falling across the room just as it always had. But inside me, something had shifted completely. I watched him as he walked in, placing his keys on the table like it was any other normal day. For a brief moment, I studied his face, searching for something. Guilt, hesitation, anything that might show he knew what I had discovered. But there was nothing. He looked calm, comfortable. Almost as if he had nothing to hide. That hurt more than I expected. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse him right away. Instead, I spoke his name softly, asking him to sit down. My voice was steady, controlled, even though I could feel everything inside me tightening. He looked at me, slightly confused, but he sat across from me without hesitation. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then I looked directly at him and asked a simple question. Is there someone else? There was no anger in my tone, no emotion he could react to or defend against. Just a quiet, direct question. He paused. Not long, but long enough. And in that pause, I got my answer. When he finally spoke, there was no denial. No attempt to hide it. No effort to protect what we had. He didn't even seem surprised that I knew. Instead, he exhaled slightly as if a burden had been lifted and said the words that would change everything. Yes, just like that. No apology, no explanation. Just a simple admission delivered without emotion. I felt something inside me drop, like the final piece of a truth I had already begun to understand. But still, I didn't react the way most people would. I didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't ask why. I just listened. He leaned back in his chair, more relaxed now, as if the hardest part was over for him. And then, without hesitation, he said something even more shocking. I think we should get a divorce. The words hung in the air, heavy but strangely calm. It was as if he had already decided everything, already moved on in his mind, while I was just now being informed of it. What hurt the most wasn't just what he said, it was how easily he said it. After 45 years together, after everything we had built, he spoke about ending it like it was a simple decision, like it meant nothing more than signing a piece of paper and moving on. I looked at him, trying to recognize the man sitting in front of me. But he didn't feel like the same person anymore. There was a distance in his eyes, a lack of connection that made everything feel unfamiliar. The man I had trusted for so long seemed to have disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't truly know. And still, I remained calm, because in that moment I realized something important. He thought he was in control. He believed he had already decided the outcome, already planned the future, already secured everything for himself. He had no idea that this was only the beginning of what was really about to unfold. The next part hurt in a way I didn't expect, not because of what he did before, but because of what he said next. After telling me he wanted a divorce, Daniel leaned forward slightly, his tone calm, almost businesslike, as if we were discussing a simple transaction instead of the end of a 4 or 5 year marriage. He told me everything was in his name. The house, the business, the accounts, everything. He spoke with a kind of confidence that made it clear he had already thought this through. To him, this wasn't emotional anymore. It was practical, final, decided. Then he made his offer, $200,000. For a moment, I just looked at him, trying to process what I had just heard. After everything we had built together, after decades of standing beside him, supporting him, believing in him, this was what he thought my life was worth. $200,000. It wasn't just the number that hurt. It was what it represented. It felt like he had taken 45 years of my existence and reduced it to a figure that was convenient for him, as if my contributions didn't matter, as if all the unseen work, the sacrifices, the quiet support I gave him over the years had no value at all. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for more. I didn't even question how he came to that number, because in that moment I understood something very clearly. This wasn't just about money. It was about how little he thought of me. He sat there, waiting for a reaction, maybe expecting anger, maybe expecting tears, maybe even expecting me to beg for something better. But I gave him none of that. I stayed quiet. There was a stillness inside me, something that had replaced the shock and pain. It wasn't acceptance, not exactly. It was something colder, more controlled, a kind of clarity. I realized that the man sitting in front of me truly believed I had no power. He thought I would simply take what he offered, sign the papers, and walk away without a fight. He thought I didn't understand the situation, didn't know my rights, didn't have the strength to challenge him. And maybe for a long time I had allowed him to believe that. I had stayed in the background, letting him take the lead, letting him make the decisions, letting him think he was the one holding everything together. But he never saw what I was doing quietly behind the scenes. He never noticed how carefully I paid attention, how I kept records, how I made sure I understood more than he realized. So when he gave me that offer, thinking it was enough, to end everything. I didn't feel the need to correct him. Not yet. Instead, I nodded slowly, as if I was considering it, as if I was a woman with no other option. And that's exactly what he believed, because sometimes the greatest advantage you can have is letting someone think you have none. That night, the house felt unusually quiet. The same walls in Lake Nona that once held laughter and comfort now felt still, almost distant. Daniel had gone to bed early, as if nothing significant had happened, as if our entire life hadn't just been reduced to a conversation and an offer. But I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat alone in the living room, the soft light casting long shadows across the space. My mind wasn't racing anymore. The shock had settled into something else, something calmer, more focused. For the first time since everything unfolded, I allowed myself to think clearly. Slowly, I stood up and walked toward a drawer I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside it were old files, documents I had kept over the years, quietly, without ever thinking I would truly need them. It had always been a habit of mine to save things, to stay organized, to make sure nothing important was ever lost. Back then, it felt like a simple responsibility. That night, it felt like something much bigger. I placed the files on the table and sat down. One by one, I began to open them. Each page carried a piece of our history. Agreements, signatures, financial records, details of decisions we had made together over the years. Things Daniel probably forgot about. Things he never imagined would matter. But I remembered. I always remembered. As I carefully went through the papers, something began to take shape. A detail here, a clause there, small things that on their own didn't seem significant, but together they told a completely different story than the one Daniel believed. My hands moved slowly, deliberately, as I searched deeper. And then I found it. I paused for a moment, staring at the document in front of me. There it was, clear, undeniable, my name, not as a witness, not as a formality, but as a co-owner. A quiet breath escaped me as I leaned back slightly, letting the reality of it settle in. For years, this had existed, signed, recorded, legally valid, and yet it had remained hidden in the background, unnoticed, even by the person who thought he controlled everything. Daniel believed the house, the business, the life we built all belonged to him. But the truth was something else entirely. And now I was holding it in my hands. In that moment, everything became clear. The offer he made, the confidence he carried, the way he spoke as if the outcome was already decided, it was all based on a belief that wasn't real. He thought I had nothing, but I had everything I needed. I closed the file gently, a small, controlled smile forming on my face, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of certainty. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel lost. I felt prepared, because what Daniel didn't understand, what he had never taken the time to see, was that while he was making plans to walk away with everything, I had already secured my place in it. The next morning, everything felt different. Not because anything had visibly changed, but because I had changed. The confusion, the silence, the waiting, it was all gone. In its place was something steady, something clear. I knew what I had to do. I didn't tell Daniel anything. I didn't argue, didn't question his decisions, didn't show even a hint of what I had discovered the night before. To him, I was still the same quiet woman who had accepted his terms without resistance. And that was exactly how I wanted it to stay. Instead, I made a call. I hired a new lawyer. From the moment I sat in his office, I could feel the difference. This time, I wasn't there to listen or to be advised on what little I could keep. I was there with something real, something strong. I placed the documents in front of him, one by one, watching carefully as he read through them. At first, his expression was neutral. Then it changed. He looked up at me, surprised, almost impressed. "Where did you get these?" he asked. "I've always had them," I replied calmly. There was a brief silence as he processed that. Then he leaned back slightly, a faint smile forming on his face, not out of amusement, but out of understanding. He could see what this meant. He could see what Daniel had completely overlooked. "You realize what this does, right?" he said. I nodded. "I do." And just like that, everything shifted. The case that Daniel thought was simple was no longer simple. When we went to court, I stayed the same, quiet, composed, observant. Daniel, on the other hand, walked in with confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you've already won. He barely looked at me, as if I was no longer worth his attention. But that didn't matter anymore, because this time I wasn't standing there empty-handed. As the proceedings began, my lawyer presented the documents. One by one, carefully, clearly, without rushing. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the truth that had been hidden for so long. I watched Daniel's expression closely. At first there was confusion, then disbelief, and slowly something else, realization. The confidence he walked in with began to fade. His posture shifted, his focus sharpened, and for the first time he truly looked at me, not with indifference, but with uncertainty, because now he understood. This wasn't going the way he expected. The courtroom atmosphere changed as more details came out. Financial records, ownership agreements, things he had either forgotten or assumed would never matter. His claims, his assumptions, his carefully built narrative, one by one, they started to fall apart. And I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The truth was speaking for me. For years, I had stayed in the background, allowing him to take the lead, to believe he was the one in control. But in that moment, it became clear that control was never as one-sided as he thought. Every quiet decision I had made, every document I had kept, every detail I had paid attention to, it all came together right there in front of him. And for the first time since this began, he realized he was the one losing. The final day in court arrived with a quiet sense of certainty. I walked in calmly, the same way I had carried myself through every moment of this journey, without fear, without hesitation. The room felt still, almost heavy with anticipation, but inside me there was nothing but clarity. Daniel sat across from me, but he no longer looked like the man who had once been so confident. The certainty he carried at the beginning was gone. In its place was something uncertain, something uneasy. He avoided my eyes at first, and when he finally looked up, there was a question in his expression, one he didn't need to ask out loud. The proceedings didn't last long. Everything that needed to be said had already been presented. The truth had already come out. All that was left now was the decision. As the judge began to speak, the courtroom fell completely silent. Every word felt deliberate, measured, final. I listened carefully, not because I was unsure, but because this moment marked the end of something that had defined most of my life. And then it was done. The ruling was in my favor. I was awarded millions. Full ownership of the house in Lake Nona. Everything Daniel believed he had secured for himself was no longer his. There was no sudden burst of emotion, no dramatic reaction, just a quiet, steady feeling settling inside me, not relief, not even victory in the way people usually imagine it. Something deeper, something calmer. Daniel sat there, motionless, the reality of what had just happened slowly catching up to him. The man who once spoke with complete confidence now had nothing to say. His plans, his assumptions, his belief that he was in control, it had all collapsed in front of him. And I didn't feel the need to say anything to him, because there was nothing left to prove. I stood up slowly, gathering my things, aware that this moment was not just the end of a case, but the closing of a chapter that had lasted 45 years. A chapter filled with memories, sacrifices, and lessons I would carry with me for the rest of my life. But as I walked out of that courtroom, I realized something important. What I gained was not just money or property. It was freedom. Freedom from a life where I had slowly become invisible. Freedom from a relationship that had lost its honesty. Freedom to finally exist on my own terms, without doubt, without fear. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, not because everything had been easy, but because I had faced it, understood it, and moved through it without losing myself. And if there's one thing I want you to remember, it's this: never underestimate yourself. Never ignore your worth. And never let anyone convince you that it's too late to stand up for your rights, because strength doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it stays silent, waits, and wins at the right moment. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss another powerful story like this.